The truth did not arrive with shouting or tears or dramatic music. It arrived quietly on a glass rooftop under soft city lights, wrapped in silk and champagne, because on the night of their 10th wedding anniversary, Claire Morgan believed she was standing inside a memory she would one day tell her grandchildren about, the skyline glowing behind her, Ethan smiling across the table like a man who had nothing left to hide, until a single vibration on his phone split that illusion clean in half, because Claire reached for the device only to take a picture, only to capture the moment, and instead saw a message bloom across the screen that read, "Happy anniversary to us. I miss you already," and in that instant the noise of the city fell away. Her chest tightened, and she understood something that could never be undone, that love does not disappear suddenly. It rots quietly while you are busy believing in it. And before this story pulls you deeper into what happened next, take a second to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and comment below if you think betrayal deserves silence or consequences. Because Claire did not react the way movies teach people to react. She did not throw the phone. She did not confront Ethan. She did not cry. Instead, she smiled, placed the phone back on the table, raised her glass, and toasted to 10 years of marriage while something cold and focused settled behind her eyes. Because Claire Morgan was not weak, she was observant, and as Ethan talked about the reservation, the wine, the future trips they would take, Claire listened with a new kind of attention, one that replayed every late night, every cancelled plan, every unexplained expense, suddenly arranging them into a pattern that was impossible to ignore. And when Ethan excused himself to take a call, Claire checked the phone again, not searching blindly, but calmly scrolling, reading threads, dates, hotel confirmations, laughter disguised as intimacy, discovering a woman named Lauren who spoke to her husband with a familiarity that made Claire's hands tremble only once before she steadied them. Because panic wastes time, and time was about to become her most valuable weapon. And by the time Ethan returned to the table, apologizing and smiling, Claire had already made her first decision. She would not expose him tonight. She would not give him the satisfaction of chaos. She would watch, she would learn, and she would wait, because revenge rushed is revenge wasted. And the most dangerous woman in the room is the one who understands everything and says nothing. So she laughed at his jokes, touched his hand, kissed his cheek, and let him believe he was safe, because men who cheat often confuse silence with ignorance. And that misunderstanding would cost Ethan everything. And over the following weeks, Claire became a shadow in her own life, present but unseen, observing Ethan patterns, noting the nights he claimed to be traveling for work, the sudden gym sessions, the new cologne, the careless confidence that comes when someone believes they are untouchable. And she discovered that Lauren was not a mistake or a moment of weakness. She was a system, a parallel relationship, carefully maintained for almost 3 years, funded quietly through their joint accounts, hidden behind vague labels and business expenses. And this discovery did something irreversible to Claire. It removed hope, because once hope dies, clarity takes its place, and clarity is ruthless. And Claire began documenting everything: screenshots, account statements, calendar overlaps, travel itineraries, voicemails accidentally left open. And while Ethan believed his wife was still the woman who rearranged her schedule around his needs, Claire was building a private archive of truth that would one day speak louder than any argument. And it mattered that Claire handled the finances, because she had always been the responsible one, the planner, the woman who sacrificed her own career momentum so Ethan could chase ambition without distraction. And now that same sacrifice became leverage, because the law favors evidence and Claire was collecting it patiently, methodically, without emotion. And what hurt the most was not the affair itself but the ease with which Ethan lied, the way he looked at her and spoke about loyalty, trust, partnership, while actively dismantling all three. And some nights, Claire sat alone in the dark, not crying but thinking, realizing that the man she married would never confess unless cornered, would never stop unless forced, and would never respect her pain unless it cost him something real. And so she stopped asking herself why he cheated, and started asking herself how far he had gone. And the answer was far enough to destroy him if the truth ever stood in the right place, because Ethan's reputation was everything. His firm, his image, his carefully curated success story built on the illusion of control and integrity. And Claire knew that if she wanted real justice, she could not be emotional. She had to be strategic, because a private confrontation would only lead to private apologies and public lies. And Claire did not survive 10 years of marriage to be erased quietly, so she kept playing her role perfectly, attending events, smiling at colleagues, standing beside Ethan like a trophy he never earned, while inside she was already planning her exit, not as a victim, but as a witness. Because witnesses do not shout, they testify, and as weeks turned into months, Ethan grew careless, confident that his secret life was stable, unaware that the woman sleeping beside him had already stepped several moves ahead. Because betrayal does not end relationships immediately, it reveals who has been preparing and who has been pretending, and Claire was done pretending. The months following the anniversary revelation became a silent battlefield, because Ethan's confidence grew while Claire's patience deepened, and every casual remark he made in conversation, every glance toward Lauren, every boast about his supposed efficiency and success, was catalogued in her mind, turned into a timeline, a map of deception that she could exploit with precision, and she became the model of the perfect wife, hosting dinners, engaging with colleagues, laughing at his jokes, attending board meetings by his side, all the while sharpening her strategy like a scalpel. And she learned that the most potent form of revenge is patience, because when a person believes the world is theirs, they let their guard down, and Ethan did exactly that. Bragging about new business ventures, sharing insider tips about clients, showing off his apparent mastery over finances, never noticing that Claire was quietly learning things he thought were secrets, making notes, taking discreet pictures of documents, cross-referencing statements, observing patterns in his behavior, and slowly but surely, planting seeds of accountability everywhere he had assumed safety. And as Claire worked on her personal plan, she also began understanding Lauren's habits, the way she interacted with Ethan, the places she frequented, the hours she preferred, and she even discovered that Lauren's ambition exceeded the affair itself, because she was not just a distraction, she was positioning herself in Ethan's world, creating her own alliances, attempting to build trust with people who thought she was a friend, and this knowledge became Claire's weapon. Because to destroy someone carefully, you must understand not just their actions, but the motives of everyone who supports them, and every meeting, every lunch, every casual invite Claire attended, she observed the environment, gauging reactions, noting vulnerabilities, and quietly she also rebuilt herself, restarting projects she had shelved for Ethan, contacting old mentors, exploring freelance opportunities, re-establishing professional relationships. Because revenge without strength is impotent, and the strength Claire built was invisible to Ethan, who believed he had stripped her of independence, unaware that by underestimating her, he was walking into a trap of his own making. And Claire never acted hastily, because she knew that the perfect trap is invisible until it snaps shut. And so the months passed, and Ethan's arrogance grew, and one morning Claire took a small but decisive action, transferring small sums from joint accounts into accounts only she controlled, using methods so precise that he did not notice for weeks, and she monitored every change, every transaction, testing boundaries, seeing how far he would go without detection, because part of revenge is understanding not just the act of betrayal, but the consequences it produces. And when Ethan began noticing minor discrepancies, he blamed accountants, systems, clients, unaware that Claire had laid the groundwork to reveal the entire picture all at once. And then came the perfect opportunity. Because Ethan's firm announced a major merger, a public celebration of what he considered his ultimate success, and he decided to bring both wives to the gala, thinking Lauren was safe in the shadows. And Claire immediately recognized the potential, because in public, betrayal and truth collide with maximum force, and she volunteered to manage media and presentation content, claiming she wanted to help, because a man who cheats never imagines his victim controlling the narrative. And on the night of the gala, Claire arrived with a calm elegance that made her presence unavoidable, while Ethan strutted with pride, introducing Lauren as a friend, completely unaware that the presentation behind him contained not just photos and achievements, but every piece of evidence of his lies, every transaction, every text message, every missed anniversary, every hidden vacation, a montage that began innocently enough, showing childhood memories, weddings, shared successes, and then twisted slowly into the hidden reality, laying bare the parallel life he had led, his duplicity now visible to all. And as Ethan took the stage, confident and smug, Claire quietly approached, microphone in hand, and began narrating the evidence with calm authority, without a hint of rage, without a tear. Because facts do not need emotion, and the audience watched in stunned silence as she methodically detailed the affair, the financial misconduct, the manipulations, and the timeline that Ethan had thought impossible to reconstruct. And when she mentioned Lauren, naming her for the first time in the room, pointing out the carefully constructed lies, the whispers began, then the gasps, and suddenly the perfect man who had smiled so smugly for years was trapped in a silence more suffocating than any confrontation. And Claire spoke to the audience, turning the narrative from betrayal into lesson, explaining that trust is fragile, transparency is essential, and that someone who undermines both will eventually face consequences. And every word she spoke was measured, precise, delivered with a dignity that Ethan had never imagined she possessed, because in his mind she had been compliant, silent, and obedient, never realizing that compliance can be weaponized, that silence can hide strength, and that dignity can amplify shame. And as she walked off stage, leaving Ethan frozen under the weight of exposure, Lauren fled quietly, the illusion of security shattered, while the board members, colleagues, investors, and friends looked on in a mixture of awe and horror. Because the facade Ethan had built so carefully was now irrevocably destroyed, and in that moment Claire did not feel victory, she felt clarity, because revenge is not about joy, it is about restoration. Restoration of self, dignity, and truth. And when the gala ended, Ethan attempted to explain, to justify, to apologize, but every word he uttered sounded hollow in the room that had just witnessed the facts. And Claire moved forward with a precision that could not be ignored, filing for divorce, presenting the compiled evidence, freezing assets, ensuring that everything Ethan had built on deceit would unravel legally and publicly, while she regained independence, assets, and respect. And as days turned into weeks, the consequences of his betrayal multiplied, mergers fell through, clients withdrew, partners distanced themselves, and Ethan's reputation crumbled like a structure built on sand. And while he tried to salvage what little remained, Claire rebuilt, not in revenge, but in honor of her own life, because the greatest power in this world is not in punishing others, but in reclaiming yourself. And as she signed new contracts, resumed her projects, and walked through city streets without fear or shame, she understood that betrayal, once revealed, can teach far more than deception ever did. And in quiet moments she reflected on how easy it is to underestimate a woman who is prepared, patient, and unshakable, because Ethan had believed he controlled every aspect of her life, every dollar, every emotion, every choice. But in reality, he had underestimated the one thing he could never control, her intelligence, her patience, and her courage. And the man who thought he had power over her now had none, and the woman he betrayed had everything. Because revenge is never just about the act itself, it is about the reclamation of self, and Claire Morgan had done it with flawless strategy, perfect timing, and undeniable elegance. Even after the gala, even after the world had seen Ethan's arrogance stripped bare, Claire did not stop, because revenge that is incomplete is not revenge at all, and she understood that destroying his reputation was only the first step. The next step was dismantling the false sense of security he carried through every remaining aspect of his life. And she moved with quiet precision, contacting former colleagues who had been manipulated into silence, sharing verifiable evidence of his misconduct, and planting seeds of accountability, so that every professional network he relied upon began questioning not only his competence but also his integrity. And she continued documenting every interaction, every email, every hidden contract, building a fortress of proof that ensured there was no path for Ethan to reclaim what he had lost. And while Ethan scrambled, attempting to repair bridges that Claire had long since burned deliberately, she expanded her own life beyond revenge, engaging in projects she had shelved for years, traveling to meetings alone, mentoring new professionals, and rebuilding friendships that had withered while she devoted herself to a man who did not deserve her loyalty. And every move she made was intentional, because she understood that control comes not from confrontation, but from preparation, patience, and presence. And as Ethan's desperation grew, he began making mistakes, double booking meetings, sending careless emails, lying about clients, all while Claire quietly observed, recording, and waiting for the exact moment to intervene, because timing is everything when dismantling someone who underestimated you. And soon, Ethan's allies began noticing inconsistencies, minor discrepancies that built into a pattern impossible to ignore. And as murmurs of doubt circulated, Claire used subtle influence, offering insight in meetings, suggesting alternative strategies, gently redirecting conversations, all while maintaining the image of a loyal spouse, a professional partner, a woman whose intelligence was never threatening until it became undeniable. And the more Ethan tried to regain control, the more he fell into the structure Claire had built around him, because she understood psychology as well as law. And she knew that a man who betrayed cannot thrive when every action is observed, every decision second-guessed, every hidden maneuver laid bare in careful documentation. And while Ethan's anxiety grew, Claire also began preparing the legal stage for divorce, assembling forensic accountants, lawyers, and advisors who could act with precision once the moment arrived. And she did not rush, because hasty actions would compromise her position, but she remained ready, knowing that patience amplifies power. And in those months, she also began exploring personal growth, attending seminars, rebuilding fitness routines, reconnecting with old friends, and even exploring a new apartment in a quiet neighborhood, a space that symbolized independence and freedom, because revenge is not complete without the reclamation of life. And Claire intended to have both: the destruction of Ethan's deception and the rebuilding of herself stronger, wiser, and free. And as she executed these steps, Ethan continued to spiral, oblivious that every misstep he made was being logged, cross-referenced, and prepared for public exposure. And he began calling friends and family, explaining partially, lying selectively, trying to salvage relationships that were already fractured. But Claire had anticipated every attempt, having prepared counter-narratives and evidence that made excuses impossible, because she understood that controlling the story is as important as controlling the evidence, and the truth, once paired with timing, is unstoppable. And when the moment came, Claire acted decisively, filing for divorce with a meticulous package of documents that left Ethan no room to negotiate, to manipulate, or to plead. And the settlement was swift, legal authorities acting with clarity once the evidence was reviewed, assets divided, and Claire reclaimed her share of everything, not out of greed, but because she had every right, every claim, every proof. And while Ethan attempted to argue, the evidence was irrefutable, demonstrating financial misconduct, betrayal, and misrepresentation. And as news of the settlement circulated, Ethan's professional life continued to crumble. Clients withdrew contracts, partnerships dissolved, and his reputation, once pristine, became a cautionary tale of arrogance and deception. And Claire, meanwhile, thrived in the aftermath, taking control of her career, resuming projects she had paused for years, traveling without constraint, and rebuilding her network, her confidence, and her independence. And every success she achieved became a reminder that patience, intelligence, and strategy surpass impulsive reactions. Because the woman Ethan betrayed did not seek immediate revenge, she sought total restoration, and she achieved it because she combined skill, observation, and timing. And in doing so, she reclaimed not just property and asset, but dignity, self-respect, and a sense of security that Ethan had long assumed he could control. And in the quiet moments when she reflected on the past, she understood that betrayal is not just an act against love, it is a test of strength, and she had passed with a precision that left no room for doubt. And every time she encountered Ethan or Lauren in public, she maintained a calm, composed exterior, because the greatest power is visible not in aggression, but in silent triumph. And Claire continued her life, stronger than before, more independent than ever, building wealth, experiences, and connections, while Ethan struggled to repair what he had thought untouchable. And as months became a year, Ethan's life had deteriorated into instability, uncertainty, and isolation, while Claire rose with measured grace, hosting events, mentoring younger professionals, investing strategically, and even taking time for personal growth, because revenge without rebuilding is incomplete. And Claire understood that, which is why every decision she made after exposing the betrayal was designed not just to punish, but to empower. And she succeeded, because the man who underestimated her learned too late that intelligence, patience, and careful observation are more dangerous than any impulsive confrontation. And as she watched her own reflection in the city windows one evening, she saw not a woman defined by betrayal, but a woman who reclaimed herself, who had transformed devastation into opportunity, who had turned betrayal into a lesson, not for Ethan, but for herself. And the lesson was simple, yet powerful: trust your instincts, prepare for consequences, act with precision, and never underestimate the silent strength of someone who has been wronged. Because when revenge is carefully planned, when evidence is undeniable, when patience and intelligence are combined, no betrayal can survive exposure. And Claire Morgan had proven that completely, leaving Ethan a shadow of his former self, powerless to undo the damage. And she, fully restored, unstoppable, and free, could finally breathe without the weight of deception pressing down on her. Because the most important victory in revenge is not in the punishment of another, but in the reclamation of oneself. and Claire had achieved that perfectly, with patience, with strategy, and with unwavering calm, knowing that the life she now lived belonged entirely to her, and that nothing, not betrayal, not arrogance, not deception, could take that away. Even after reclaiming her independence and exposing Ethan's deception to the world, Claire did not stop, because the full measure of justice requires not only the dismantling of lies, but also the careful consolidation of power and security to ensure that betrayal could never threaten her again. And she approached every aspect of her life with meticulous attention, reviewing finances, legal documents, and professional agreements, verifying that no hidden loopholes or manipulations could be exploited. And she rebuilt her career in a way that left no one questioning her competence or authority, taking on projects that had once been off-limits while Ethan scrambled to maintain relevance in industries that now viewed him with suspicion. And every interaction she had with former colleagues, clients, or mutual acquaintances was deliberate, measured, and designed to reinforce her credibility while subtly exposing the void left by Ethan's absence of integrity. Because she understood that reputation is not just what you say about yourself but what others see when your actions align perfectly with truth. And Claire began documenting every step of her rebuilding process, not for vengeance, but for clarity, ensuring that if anyone ever questioned her motives, she could demonstrate that every action was based on strategy, foresight, and intelligence. And while Ethan continued to stumble, making desperate attempts to repair relationships or reassert control, Claire's presence in professional and personal spheres became a reminder that his arrogance had blinded him to her strength. And she even began leveraging her knowledge of Ethan and Lauren's past maneuvers in business settings, gently steering negotiations, influencing decisions, and showcasing insights that only someone with her intimate understanding of deceit could provide. And as a result, clients and partners who once trusted Ethan instinctively began seeking Claire's advice, creating a network of influence that further isolated him, while simultaneously reinforcing her own position. And she never acted out of cruelty or spite, only precision and calculation, understanding that the most effective form of revenge is not rash or emotional but thoughtful and unavoidable. And during this time, she also focused on her personal development, taking time to travel, explore passions she had postponed, invest in health, education, and relationships, because Claire understood that recovery and empowerment are integral components of revenge. And nothing reinforces victory more than thriving in a world your adversary thought you could not navigate alone. And the months that followed became a symphony of quiet domination, each move calculated, each decision strengthening her independence, while Ethan's confidence, once brash and unshakable, continued to erode. And even Lauren, who had once felt untouchable in the affair, faded from the story entirely, because Claire had addressed not just Ethan but every variable he had relied upon, leaving no loose ends. And she also ensured that her social and professional circles were informed, subtly but effectively, that the narrative surrounding Ethan was no longer under his control, and every event, meeting, and decision reflected her intelligence, strategic foresight, and undeniable competence, leaving him with a growing sense of helplessness that only compounded his public and personal failures. And while some might have expected Claire to feel vindictive satisfaction, her focus was never the destruction itself. It was the reclamation, because revenge without reconstruction is hollow, and she understood this better than anyone. And as she organized her assets, invested wisely, and reasserted herself in spaces she had once ceded for love, Claire achieved a balance that was both liberating and empowering. And she remained vigilant, knowing that betrayal leaves scars that are not always visible, and that vigilance ensures the lessons learned are never forgotten. And during this period, she also forged new alliances, sought mentors, and built friendships grounded in authenticity rather than convenience, because the people around you amplify your influence. And she understood that her resurgence required both personal strength and a network of trust. And every conversation, every interaction, every handshake was deliberate, calculated to reinforce her position, while simultaneously exposing the fragility of Ethan's influence. And as his attempts to rebuild faltered, Claire's life became an embodiment of controlled power, freedom, and dignity, her daily routines reflecting careful planning, professional excellence, and personal fulfillment. And she continued to monitor Ethan's movements discreetly, because awareness is an essential element of security. And she observed his continued attempts at reputation management, noting the mistakes, the inconsistencies, and the desperation that revealed his vulnerability. and she continued to document these, not for public display but to ensure a record existed in case any future attempts at manipulation occurred. And even in the moments of solitude, Claire reflected on the journey, acknowledging the pain, betrayal, and disillusionment, but focusing not on bitterness, rather on the empowerment gained through endurance, intelligence, and strategy. And she realized that the most profound revenge is invisible until it manifests through success, and unwavering control over the narrative of your own life. And every decision she made moving forward was informed by this principle. And it became clear that Ethan, once so confident in his dominance and manipulation, was now a lesson in underestimation, because he had believed compliance and silence indicated weakness, and Claire had demonstrated that patience, observation, and careful preparation are far more potent than impulsive reaction. And as she continued to flourish in her professional sphere, regain control of finances, explore personal passions, and rebuild friendships, she understood that the life she now led was a testament to her resilience, intelligence, and courage, and that the consequences of Ethan's deception were irreversible, not because she sought to humiliate him, but because she ensured that the truth and integrity could never be undermined. And as the months evolved into years, Claire reached a level of stability, wealth, and influence she had never imagined, all built on the foundation of patience, strategy, and unwavering focus. And Ethan remained a cautionary example of arrogance, manipulation, and betrayal, a man who had believed he could control everything and everyone around him, only to discover too late that underestimating the quiet intelligence of someone you betray is a mistake that cannot be undone. And in those years, Claire never wavered, never acted impulsively, never allowed revenge to cloud judgment, because she had learned that the most powerful response to betrayal is mastery of self and mastery of circumstance. And by the time she stood on the threshold of full independence and personal fulfillment, she understood fully that the journey had not been about punishment alone, but about reclaiming life, dignity, and freedom in a way that no one could diminish. And every choice she had made, every plan carefully executed, every act of observation and strategy culminated in a life that was entirely hers, unshakable, thriving, and beautiful, because Claire had mastered the art of revenge that does not destroy the soul, but rebuilds it stronger, wiser, and untouchable. In the months and years that followed, Claire Morgan life became a testament to resilience, intelligence, and the transformative power of patience, because every step she took after exposing Ethan's deception was measured, deliberate, and rooted in strategy. And she no longer allowed herself to be defined by betrayal, but instead by the reclamation of independence, dignity, and control. And she built a routine that reflected both stability and personal fulfillment, traveling to meetings with confidence, managing projects with expertise, reconnecting with old friends, and forging new relationships grounded in authenticity, while Ethan continued to struggle, his attempts to rebuild credibility faltering under the weight of his past actions. And each misstep he made reinforced the careful planning Claire had undertaken, because she had ensured that every document, every transaction, every secret had been accounted for and verified, leaving no opportunity for manipulation or reversal. And while some might have expected satisfaction in his failure, Claire understood that true victory comes from empowerment rather than revenge alone, and she focused her energy on growth, building wealth, influence, and personal freedom, taking pleasure in her accomplishments not as payback, but as proof of her own strength and capability. And as she reflected on the years since the anniversary that revealed Ethan's betrayal, she realized that the silent patience, careful observation, and meticulous planning had been more powerful than confrontation or rage could ever have been, and her life, now fully under her own direction, reflected a balance of personal joy, professional success, and the quiet assurance that no one could ever undermine her again. And even when encountering reminders of Ethan or the woman he had brought into their lives, Claire maintained composure, because the greatest power is not in aggression, but in mastery over oneself and circumstances. And she continued to thrive, mentoring others who had experienced betrayal, sharing lessons about patience, intelligence, and the importance of reclaiming control of one's life. And while Ethan attempted sporadic efforts to regain status, Claire's influence continued to grow, her network of respect, trust, and credibility expanding, while his crumbled under the weight of exposure and loss. And she never allowed anger or vengeance to dictate her actions, instead relying on preparation, timing, and clarity, ensuring that her victories were both permanent and dignified. And during this period, she also rebuilt her personal life, exploring passions, hobbies, and experiences that had been paused or suppressed, because she understood that true recovery and empowerment required not only restitution but also the creation of new foundations for happiness and self-fulfillment. And as she moved through each stage of rebuilding, her confidence and presence became undeniable, with colleagues, friends, and acquaintances noticing the elegance, intelligence, and calm authority she carried effortlessly. And even in spaces where Ethan's presence lingered, she navigated with grace, demonstrating that the one he had betrayed was now untouchable, independent, and thriving, while he remained trapped in a cycle of regret, failed attempts, and diminishing relevance. And Claire had achieved something far more significant than punishment. She had transformed devastation into opportunity, betrayal into clarity, and silence into power, proving that the most effective response to deception is not immediate confrontation, but strategic preparation, deliberate action, and consistent self-empowerment. And as years passed, Claire continued to expand her influence, both professionally and personally, investing wisely, nurturing relationships built on trust and authenticity, mentoring younger professionals, and taking time to experience the life she had long deferred, because she understood that true revenge is meaningless without the simultaneous creation of a life worth living. And in this way, every decision, every effort, every calculated action contributed to a narrative in which she was the protagonist of her own story, fully in control, fully restored, and fully independent, while Ethan, who had once believed he could manipulate, control, and deceive without consequence, had nothing left to rely upon, and the lessons he had ignored were now clear, because Claire's patience, intelligence, and precise planning had left him powerless, and she reflected on how easily arrogance blinds people to the strength of those they seek to dominate, and how the quiet, methodical preparation of someone underestimated is far more devastating than the loudest confrontation. And through her journey, Claire not only reclaimed her life, but also her self-respect, proving to herself and the world that independence, intelligence, and strategic thinking are the most effective forms of power, and that betrayal, no matter how deep, can be transformed into opportunity, restoration, and empowerment. And as she watched the city skyline years after the anniversary that changed everything, she understood fully that her life, her career, and her identity were now entirely her own, untouchable, thriving, and unshakable, because she had mastered patience, observation, and strategy in a way that left no room for failure, and she had achieved something more important than revenge: complete mastery over her own destiny, her future, and her happiness. And in that quiet reflection, she finally felt complete, free, and unbound, knowing that betrayal, exposure, and patience had led to the creation of a life that no one, not even the man who once betrayed her, could ever take away, and that the ultimate truth of her journey was simple, yet profound. Strength is built in silence, wisdom is forged through observation, patience ensures victory, and reclaiming oneself is the most powerful triumph of all. And in every aspect of her reconstructed life, professional achievements, personal growth, financial independence, meaningful relationships, and inner peace, Claire Morgan proved that strategic patience and intelligence surpass emotion, impulsivity, or temporary satisfaction, and that the woman who had been wronged can emerge not only unbroken, but stronger, wiser, and untouchable. And as she moved forward, fully confident in her life and decisions, she carried with her the clarity, power, and freedom that comes only from knowing that justice, strategy, and self-reclamation are more powerful than betrayal, deception, or temporary rage. And this, more than anything, was the lasting legacy of the years she endured, observed, calculated, and rebuilt, because she had transformed every challenge, every betrayal, and every obstacle into a testament of her own resilience, intelligence, and unshakable independence, leaving Ethan a figure defined by regret and failure, and herself a figure defined by strength, triumph, and enduring mastery of her own destiny.